Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Last First Date Radio, featuring interviews with experts in dating, relating, and mating in midlife. And now, here's your host, Sandy Weiner.
Hello, everybody. This is Sandy, and welcome to Last First Date Radio, the place to be for creating healthy, lasting relationships in midlife. And today, I'm really excited to be speaking with sex and intimacy expert Xanet Pailet about how to awaken sexuality and create more intimacy at any stage of life. But before I bring her on, I just wanted to say a little bit about my work, that I've been doing this love and women's empowerment work for about 11 years now. And it really makes me so happy to help women over 40 enter into the best relationships they've ever had. Often it really is the first time they've fallen in love at age 50, 60, 70, and beyond. So I want you to know that this is possible for anyone. And today we're going to be exploring the secrets to having a great sex life on top of having a great relationship. And they're both very intertwined. And in my whole school of thought, really the secret to finding love is finding your own value first. And knowing your needs, knowing your value, being able to express all of that with grace as a woman of value. And I am growing this movement, and I'm about to launch a new website soon called The Woman of Value. And I will be working with women both in love, but also in work and in life. And I'm really excited to help more women speak up, show up, stand up in their value, and let people know that valuing yourself is not negotiable. It's absolutely not negotiable. Every week I bring you a tip on how to be a woman of value, and this week's tip is don't be a people pleaser. This is one of my favorites because I am a recovering people pleaser. Why don't we want to be people pleasing? I see it so much. In fact, I dated a guy once who, on like my second date with him, he was cooking a full, 4-course meal for me, and I told him I really liked the chicken, the way he prepared it, and he went to the butcher and bought me some. And I mean, it was beautiful, and it was too much. It made me uncomfortable because we barely knew each other. So we have to be careful about who we give to, how much we give. People really need to earn their way into our lives, I believe. I mean, you can be very loving and giving, but if you're doing it to win people over, then you're often giving up bits of yourself to please somebody else. And again, that ties back to my whole belief in being a woman of value, loving and valuing yourself and your own needs, and making sure that when you're making somebody else happy, it's not, the cost isn't that you're giving up something really important to yourself. All right, so let's let that sink in for a minute. And before I bring on my special guest, I just want to invite you to join my private Facebook group. It's called Your Last First Date. And if you're not yet a member, this is one of the most amazing groups. These women, and we have about 2,700 women in there, very heavily monitored, so the conversation never goes off the rails. We have women really asking high-value questions, not low-value questions, like, why do men do this? I really am very careful about helping women be positive and grow in their search for lasting love. So join us at Your Last First Date. All right, my special guest, Xanet, is a former New York City healthcare lawyer. She lived in a sexless marriage for over 20 years. She experienced her own sexual healing and awakening in 2011, and she then transitioned her career to full-time sex and intimacy educator and coach. She now works with individuals and couples to empower them around their sexuality and strengthen relationship and intimacy skills. She is a certified somatic sex and intimacy coach, sexological body worker, holistic pelvic care practitioner, Tantra educator, and somatic experiencing trauma practitioner. There's a lot of words there. She's on the faculty of the Ecstatic Living Institute and the Somatica Institute. Welcome to the show, Xanet.
Thank you, Sandy. I am so happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you. And I love that you went down your own path and then became that and paid it forward to other people to help them. So can you tell us a little bit more about why you transitioned from lawyer to sex and intimacy coach?
Yeah, for sure. It was not my intention. It was never on the vision board. I can tell you that. It was really, it was a personal journey because I was in a marriage with a wonderful man, loving husband, but it was a sexless marriage, and it was a sexless marriage. I mean, I had 2 children, so it wasn't completely sexless. But basically, after my second child was born, when I was young, I was still like 28 when I had my second child, I basically, closed up shop. And I closed up shop because sex had always been very painful for me. This had been an issue since the first time I had sex when I was 16, and it never got any better. And I was very disconnected from my sexuality. Pretty much anything having to do with sex or female reproduction or the female body parts were problematic for me. It was a hassle, and we ended up getting in fights, and we decided it just wasn't worth it. We didn't actually make that conscious decision, but as what happens, which is not uncommon, is you start to stop having sex, and then you stop having cuddles, and then you stop kissing each other. And we ended up sleeping in separate beds for almost 12 years while we were living in New York City and raising our kids. So when we finally decided to separate amicably, I was 49, I think. I was just turning 50. And it's kind of like what you said. I looked at myself in the mirror and I'm like, okay, well, I want to have another relationship, but what is this OkCupid ad going to say? Like, awesome woman, really loving, really kind, but hates sex, like that wasn't going to work. So I realized that I just had to really look inside myself, and I had to deal with my own sexual issues. And that's what I did. I kind of took a deep dive into it. I happened to meet a man in New York. This is actually how my book starts, who had been practicing some Tantra and had done a workshop. And he's the one who introduced me to this practice, which was completely different than any type of I had ever had before or sexual experience I had ever had before. And I realized, like, oh, this is my doorway into my sexual healing. This will allow me to settle, to relax, to look at sexuality from a completely different perspective. And that was really what happened. And then I ended up leaving New York and moving to the West Coast. And I took a huge deep dive into sexuality, and, in a period of like 18 months, which was ridiculously fast, I took all of these very intensive training programs, components of which were actually like doing work on each other, because it was very hands-on work. And that allowed me to really both awaken my sexuality and heal so much of my pain and my fear and my shame and all of the things that really came together to prevent me from enjoying my sex life.
Wow. I love your OkCupid profile. Awesome woman doesn't like sex. But the part of the book that I really loved when you described the man that you met is that this was actually new for him. You had been dating him for a while, and suddenly he comes back from this workshop and he wants to treat you like a goddess, and it was your night, and it was just like, okay, all righty then.
Wow.
And like amazing. Like, who wouldn't want to be treated like a goddess and have it all be about her pleasure for a change, right?
Right. Yeah, it was a very different experience because, well, I think my husband did try to pleasure me. He worked really hard at trying to pleasure me. There was a piece here around not having expectations, right? Like most of the time women are concerned about, or you're concerned about like, oh, am I going to have an orgasm? Am I going to do it right? Am I taking too long? Like all of those issues that just hold us back from really being in our bodies. And on this night, it was just like whatever you want, right? Like I don't care what happens. We just get to be like present with each other in the moment. And that was an amazing and very, very different experience for me. He never even took his hands off, right? So it really was no pressure.
Wow. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I think that, the expectation piece is so huge. No matter if it's about sex or if it's about the dating part, like having expectations about what your date's going to be like and are they going to disappoint you? And I think people really are setting themselves up for disappointment consistently. And I think it was Henry Winkler who says assumptions are the termites of relationships. I think that was his, something like that. Yeah, I think that we make assumptions, we have expectations, and it all starts when we're very young. So let's go there and talk about the blueprint that gets created when we're children about sexuality. When in my work I talk about our family blueprint and the marriage that we experienced that our parents had or didn't have and how it affects our love life. But you talk about a sexual blueprint. So talk about what that is and how it impacts us as adults.
Yeah. So a sexual blueprint is really consists of all of the messages that we received around sex as children. That's one component of it. From your parents, from other family members, from cultural institutions, from religious institutions. It also consists of early childhood sexual explorations that we have, including like early self-childhood explorations, like the first time you touched yourself, and particularly if something negative happened around that, if you were shamed around that. We also look at later childhood sexual experiences, right? Like the first time you had sex and what that was like, and how sex was modeled in your household. Like, did your parents kiss in front of you? Did they let you crawl into their bed? Did you have any sense that there was anything sexual going on? And the sexual blueprint, what we find when we look at a sexual blueprint is it's just laden with these, for most people, laden with negative messages and experience and shame around our sexuality. And that is what we take into our adult sexual relationships, right? So can I give you an example of an experience that I had with one of my clients?
Sure.
So she grew up in, I think it was in Iran, and which is a very sexually closed culture. And her mother was constantly telling her negative things about sex. And one day they were driving in a car, and she saw next to her, she was about 10 or 11 years old, this woman and man on a motorcycle. And the woman was like holding this guy's waist and her hair was flying. And, it's sort of that like stereotypical picture that you see. And she said something like, oh God, I want to do something like that. And out of the blue, her mother slapped her on her face and said to her, if you do that, you're going to be a slut, just like her. She's a slut, right? And all she was doing was riding on a motorcycle. And so whenever she was touched and started to feel some sort of aliveness in her body, she completely shut down, because she told me as I was actually touching her arm and doing some touch with her, that she heard the voice of her mother telling her that she's a slut, right? That associating pleasure with being a slut and being shamed. That's a perfect example.
It's a powerful example. And I'm sure that our listeners can all think of something from their past, whether it's from childhood or, as you say, cultural and religious institutions, what we see, little things that happen to us. I mean, even I had an experience when I was probably, 8 years old, 7. And I had an uncle who was really strange, and he took my brother and I to Coney Island, New York. And he took us for the day, and my parents said be back by a certain time, and he didn't take us back by that time. All I remember is he was giving me undue attention and ignoring my brother. And anything I wanted, he would buy me, and he had me on his lap, and he was kissing me a lot. And it wasn't sexual, but it was uncomfortable. And a lot of lap stuff. Now I think back, and I know, like, that stuck with me. It really stuck with me. And I think nobody said anything, nobody did anything, but he was a very strange person. He remained single for most of his life, and he's just a troubled person. So it's, people have experiences that were uncomfortable, that made them feel some sense of shame, and they couldn't tell anybody. These are all really important pieces of our blueprint. And so how do we take the blueprint and then switch it to something positive and work through any kind of limiting beliefs in our adulthood?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing to do, and it always, is to try to normalize it, right? So we try to normalize the shame. We try to normalize the discomfort that we felt. One of the ways in which one of the exercises that I really like to work on with my clients is having I call it a shame over, or a shame-a-thon, which is basically really looking at, an experience for you that you felt a lot of discomfort and shame around, and share it with somebody, whether it's a partner or a friend. And what we end up finding is that we're not alone, because this is the thing about shame. Shame is so insidious that we even have shame to talk about our shame, right? And when we start talking about it, we realize, like, oh, wow, okay, there's other people that had similar experiences like me. Okay, I'm not weird, right? I'm not alone. And, it happened, right? It's life. It happened. We all have shame, and it's okay just to acknowledge that, we have shame and express it. And that actually is a really powerful experience. And, other things that I like to do is to help, especially for women, is to help women, like, really connect with their sexual parts, right? Really, like, just having a conversation with your body about, like, hey, how are you feeling around sex today? Like, vagina, like, really having, I call it yoni in my book, which is the Sanskrit or Tantra name. But, like, really, like, how are you feeling about sex? How are you feeling about the way in which I've been treating you? Like, just starting to connect more with ourselves helps to start to change the sexual blueprint. But it's really about normalizing, right? When we normalize shame, then we're like, okay, we're not the only one that has this. I can move on now. I can realize it's a limiting belief, and also to understand, as you said, that, these beliefs that we have are not our own beliefs, right? We are born to be pleasure-seeking creatures. That's true. Yeah. Right? Babies, they coo, right? I just spent a week with my new grandbaby. Like, all he does is either coo when he's breastfeeding, or sleep, or poop, right? That's all they do. But there's this built-in pleasure, and coming back to that realization that we're built for pleasure, and the shame is being imposed upon us by outside forces allows us to start to undo some of those messages and experiences.
Yeah, I always say that your kids are as normal as the work that you've done. And, it's like we really have to work on our own shame if we're going to be raising children. And the messages that we convey are so powerful. Like, they watch everything we do as parents. And I just remember so many times when I was raising my children when they were young, and just thinking, like, I want to do this differently than the way I was raised. I want to raise my kids with more awareness. I want to not shame them for the things that they do, and just have open conversations, and I even to the point where when my daughter was about 16, so she's now 30, and she asked me some very intimate questions about my sex life with my husband at the time, and that was a boundary I didn't want to cross with her. And I said, because she had been sharing with me. So I'm curious what you think about that. She shared with me what, her exploration was and where she was in her path. And so she wanted to know about my sex life. And I said, I'm not going to go there. It's not something you're going to want to really know. You can't unsee it or unhear it. So I don't know. Do you have a different feeling about that?
Yeah, I think it's on a case-by-case basis. I think, some kids really, some children, really want to know and want to have information because maybe it helps them sort out, what they want in a partner. And so I think that can be very helpful. And for some, there is this icky factor about oh my God, I'm having that with my children who are reading the book right now. And they're like, oh Mom, there's certain chapters we just can't read, and I'm like, that's okay, So it's an interesting line to walk. And I have 2 boys. I don't have any girls. I think if I had a girl, I would probably have more open conversations with them if they wanted to have. I mean, I'd have it with either of them, boys or girls. But yeah, I think it's an interesting issue. And I was just I was down in Nashville and did a little gathering of women who grew up mostly Southern Christian, right? And so this is so foreign to them, and also they were just soaking it in. And this woman said to me, one of them who's struggling in her sex life, said, I had so much shame growing up, and I don't want to impose that on my children. What can I do? When do I start talking with him? He's 3 years old now. And so we talked a little bit about that. But my response was what are you modeling? Does your son see that you kiss, that you hold hands? Because you can tell them whatever you want, but it's not what you tell them. It's what they see. That's how they actually take the information in, right?
I so agree with you. I think that's true about everything. What we do is so much more important than what we say. Sure. But I think it's like a boundary, and everybody's got different boundaries. And to me, it was important that they felt comfortable telling me whatever they wanted, but to know that I wasn't going to share the details of my sex life with their father because it felt like a boundary crossing. And it was hard for her to understand that, but now we're they're all adults, so it's easier to have the conversations like I've been having with my son, and how I want him to be talking to women and experiencing women in a very open and, honoring and beautiful way. So let's talk about, there's so much to talk about. And there's so much that happens also after 40 and 50 and 60 when women get back out there, especially after a long marriage. So let's talk about that for a minute, because a lot of times women are experiencing not only their own issues around menopause, and you do talk about that in the book, and how libido can change. But also men are experiencing erectile dysfunction, all kinds of other issues. So how would you suggest that people talk about these things when they're dating?
Honestly, I think, I'm a huge fan, and I practice myself, like just honest, vulnerable, authentic conversations about sex and what you like and what you don't like, and what issues that you've had. Like, I always tell partners, I've had issues with sex penetration being painful. Sometimes I still have issues with it, right? And I have lots of tools that I know how to deal with it, but, just know, like, there are things that we need to do. We need to go slow. And, I think it's really important for us to be able to communicate what's going on in our sex life, what we like, what we don't like, what we might be struggling with, and also just to say, like, let's not have any expectations. I like to talk about redefining sex as, anything that creates erotic connection. It could be just sitting and looking at your partner and connecting with them. And as far as I'm concerned, that's, if there's eroticism there, then, there's a sexual connection, and that's a sexual relationship. So I think it's really important to be honest about, what's going on for you, but also not to be beholden to your past experiences, because erectile dysfunction in particular, even in older men, so much of it is not physiological. Unless they really have low testosterone, it's psychological and it's emotional. And it's them feeling disempowered from their sexuality because of the way in which they were hurt or wounded or being sexually shut down. And so I notice with both men and women, when they're really like in a good space with a partner and there's a lot of charge, boy, their libido comes rushing back. Right? Like women tell me this all the time, like, oh my God, I all of a sudden I have this huge sex drive, and men do the same thing as well. So, I think it's like, don't just assume because that's the way it was in the past, that that's the way it's going to be in the future. I don't believe that at all. And I think there are definitely things that we can do to help, change our patterns and change the way our body is responding as well.
All right. So share some of those tips to have a better sex life. What are some things people can do?
Just slow everything down. Whatever you're doing, do it a lot slower. Whether it's touch, whether it's foreplay, like, just give yourself more time to really connect and be present with each other. And that changes a lot for people, because often we rush into sex. And sometimes it's great. Sometimes, like, hot sex is really quick and fast. But I think especially as we age, we need more time. And I think one of the most important tips that I can give your listeners is to touch your partner for your own pleasure. This is a really different paradigm and mindset shift, because normally we touch our partner the way we think they want to be touched, and we're not very conscious about it. But if you actually start touching your partner's body or arm or any part of their body, and you think about, like, oh, I'm going to touch you in a way that feels good to my hand or my body part, and really focusing on your own pleasure and your own sensation, that completely changes the experience for your partner, because they actually can feel, you basically are creating a pleasure circuit. So they can feel how good it feels to you, and that makes it feel better for them, and it turns them on, and then you feel their turn on, and so you get more turned on, right? And so it just creates this beautiful pleasure circuit between two people. And this really changes experiences for women, especially those activities that maybe you didn't like doing. You think about doing it for your own pleasure, how can I make my lips feel great? Yeah, that's a really wonderful thing. And then the last
there's
thing
nothing
I would
that's
say,
a bigger turn-on than watching your partner get turned on, for sure.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Because you feel their
what's
desire.
the last one?
The last one would be just be creative. Being willing to explore new things, new types of ways to connect. Just, go outside of the box, push your edges, do it in a really supportive and loving and fun way. But, get away from what I call vanilla, boring sex, which a lot of women and men abhor, but we put up with it.
Yes, especially in long-term relationships. Sex can become very vanilla and sort of just to get it over with so you make your partner happy and keep the peace, which is not really what most of us are looking for as we get older, and especially if we're single and have choices. So these are great tips. Slow everything down, touch your partner for your own pleasure, and be creative. I'm a creative person. I love being creative. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about, and we are really short for time, but Tantra. I had a boyfriend in high school who I was madly in love with for about 7 or 8 years, from the time I was 16 till I was my early 20s. And he got married later than I did, told me he would never get divorced. He got divorced like a year after I did. And he lived across the country, but he came back and visited me, and he had been studying Tantra. And it was the first time I heard about it. He gave me a book, so I know a little bit. But tell our audience what it is and what role it plays in sexual awakening.
Okay. So Tantra is a very ancient practice. It goes back for centuries. And Tantra is, so the definition of Tantra using the Sanskrit term is to weave. And in Tantra, we are weaving together our physical body, our energetic body, because we're all made of energy, our emotional body, and we weave this together with our partner's body and energy and emotions and physicality. And we also connect with some sort of spiritual energy as well, however you define that. So sometimes we talk about Tantra as bringing spirit into the bedroom. So it has a very spiritual practice. And what we're trying to do in a tantric practice is to really connect with our sexual energy, which runs throughout our body. It runs through these 7 energy centers, also called chakras. And we all have sexual energy, but by connecting with that sexual energy and then using that to connect with your partner, you create this very, very strong physical and energetic relationship with each other. And, people who practice Tantra are able to have orgasms without even taking their clothes off, right? You just feel the way in which your energy is actually looping together with each other. And we do this through using principles of breath, so breathing together, or actually breathing, asynchronized breathing, like one partner breathes in and the other breathes out. We do it by using sound. Sound helps us move energy around our body. And we do it through movement, so moving our bodies as well, and touch. So it's sound, energy, movement, and touch. That allows us to just have a deeper connection. You probably had the experience, if you've done some Tantra, that it just feels different. Of the sexual connection feels different because you're actually focused on the energetic piece of it, less than on the genital piece of it. And this is actually really great for older couples as well, right? When they have more potential, sometimes they have physical limitations, or men with erection issues as well. Like, you can still feel a lot of energy going through your body and feel turned on without even having to take your clothes off, if you will. And there's just a lot of beautiful tantric practices that really allow you to feel a deeper type or more spiritual type of connection. I don't want to say that one type of sex is better than another, right? It's something, everybody has their own flavor of what works for them, but it's also a very potent way into personal transformation and growth, right? Sexuality itself is one of, I think, the strongest and fastest doorways to actually transform your life, not just your sex life, but your life as well. And Tantra is a part of that. We're really focused on moving our energy between our genitals and our heart, right? And so that creates this beautiful emotional connection with a partner. And you can actually do Tantra. I don't know what book you're reading, but you can actually do Tantra by yourself. There's lots of solo tantric practices to do to be able to start to reconnect with your own sensuality and your own sexuality.
I don't remember the name of the book. It's been a couple years, but I think I love the idea of energy. I think energy is really at the base of how we connect anyway. And I think that people tend to not tune into the energy enough. Like how we feel when we're with somebody matters more than just about anything, in my opinion. And I think people walk around with these long lists of how somebody has to be and, and has to fit the external qualities. But it's the energy exchange that lights you up or drains you or fills you up. I mean, it's really something you feel. So parting words, this is also so rich, and I know that people will benefit so much from listening to this show. What's one message you would like to share with our audience, and in particular for them to be able to go on their last first date?
What a great question. I think what I want to say to your audience is to get rid of any expectations that you have and just be really present to the person who is sitting in front of you. Forget about your history and problems that you've had in relationships and problems that you've had in sex, and just be aware and present stability of that person who is sitting in front of you and enjoy that moment. And don't worry about the future and don't worry about the past. It's a very tantric principle. Be present.
It's one of the hardest things, but it is so beautiful when you can do it. So, people who are anxious are worried about the future and thinking about the past and having all kinds of fears that are not even real. But when you can just get present, it helps you to get centered. It helps you to appreciate the moment. And it's great, great advice. Thank you. Thank you so much, Xanet, for this wisdom that you shared today. And tell our audience how they can find you, how they can buy your new book.
Yes, thank you. So I have a website. It's called Power of Pleasure, powerofpleasure.com. And you can find me there. I offer all sorts of both one-on-one coaching and online, in person, if you happen to be in the Bay Area, and also some group programs for women. And my new book, Living an Orgasmic Life, Heal Yourself and Awaken Your Pleasure, which is what we've been talking about, some of the exercises and the stories from the book, you can find either on my website or you can go to Amazon.com. It's called Living an Orgasmic Life, which isn't that what we all want, Sandy, to live an orgasmic life?
Absolutely. It's so fun. I love this book. I highly recommend it. There are great client stories about your own life, which, that's getting rid of that shame story, and exercises throughout, which really makes me happy because I love reading about how to do better and how to, take the steps so that we can improve. I had lunch with a friend of mine who I did a program with, Saida Desolé. Do you know who she is?
Mm-hmm.
So Saida was on the show. We did a beautiful program together, and she was eating I had made tahini dressing for the salad that we had, and she was like, "This is orgasmic." So you can feel orgasmic about the food you eat. You can feel it about anything. So thanks again for coming on the show and for doing this beautiful work, because it is so necessary in our lives and so healing. So thank you, Xanet.
Thank you. Thanks for having an awesome podcast and helping women and men in middle age, find that last first date. It's beautiful.
Thank you. And thanks, everybody, for listening today. And if you love our show, please go over to iTunes or wherever you listen and give us a rating, a review, subscribe. It helps people find us. And I hope you all go on your last first date very soon. Have a great day.